April 9, 1940. The Norwegian Sea, 50 miles west of the Vestfjord entrance. 03:45 hours. A British battlecruiser is driving north at 20 knots into a force 10 gale, her bow lifting and crashing through swells that break green water over her forward turrets. She was commissioned in 1916. Critics in the naval press have been writing her off since 1936, when her reconstruction added so much top weight that her design speed of 30 knots became a number her engineers can no longer guarantee in open ocean conditions. Ahead of her, running northeast at maximum power, are two of the most modern capital ships in the Kriegsmarine, Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, Germany's twin fast battleships, each capable of 31 knots in calm water, each armed with 9 11-inch guns in a hull designed to outrun anything it cannot outfight. They have been sent to cover the German invasion of Norway. They have encountered the one ship in the North Sea that night that carries guns large enough to destroy them, and the storm that should have let them run has instead equalized everything. This is how an old British battlecruiser, in conditions that stripped speed from every ship equally, forced two faster German warships into a fight they could not finish and a retreat they could not conceal. The strategic picture that put HMS Renown in the Norwegian Sea on the 9th of April had been assembled in London over 72 hours of mounting intelligence reports. Germany's Operation Weserübahn, the simultaneous invasion of Denmark and Norway, was the most ambitious amphibious operation the Kriegsmarine had yet attempted. German troop convoys were at sea, covered by surface units ranging from destroyers to capital ships. The Royal Navy's response was Operation Wilfred, a mine-laying operation in Norwegian territorial waters intended to cut off Swedish iron ore shipments running south through the Leads, the sheltered coastal channel along Norway's western coast. Vice Admiral William Whitworth had sailed from Scapa Flow in Renown with a destroyer escort to cover the mine layers. He was not expecting a fleet action. The intelligence picture had placed the German heavy units in port. What neither Whitworth nor the Admiralty knew was that Scharnhorst and Gneisenau had sailed from Wilhelmshaven on the 7th of April under Admiral Gunther Luygens, tasked with drawing British naval attention away from the invasion convoys by operating in the open ocean west of Norway. The two forces were on convergent courses in a gale that neither side had chosen and neither side could avoid. To understand why the encounter that followed should not have gone the way it did, you have to understand what HMS Renown actually was by 1940, and why the naval correspondents who covered the fleet had been writing her off as too slow and too lightly protected for modern fleet operations. She had been laid down at Fairfield's Yard in Glasgow in January 1915 and commissioned in September 1916, designed to the battlecruiser formula that Admiral Fisher had championed since 1906, heavy guns and high speed bought at the cost of armor that critics had always considered inadequate. At her commissioning, she carried 6 15-inch guns and could make 32 knots, the fastest capital ship in the Royal Navy. By 1936, when she entered the dockyard at Portsmouth for a reconstruction that would last 3 years, she had been overtaken by events on every front. New German capital ships under construction were faster. New aircraft carriers made the battlecruiser's combination of heavy guns and light armor look like the worst of both worlds. The reconstruction program gave her a new secondary armament, improved anti-aircraft guns, a rebuilt bridge structure, and substantially improved horizontal armor. It also added roughly 3,000 tons to her displacement. The machinery that had driven her at 32 knots in 1916 was now moving a significantly heavier ship. Her reliable speed in the North Sea in April 1940, in the conditions Whitworth was operating in, was closer to 28 knots in calm water and something less in a force 10 gale. The two ships she was about to engage had been designed and built in the 1930s to make 31 knots. On paper, they could run from her whenever they chose. What the speed comparison did not account for was the gale. Scharnhorst and Gneisenau were powerful ships, but they were also ships whose bow design, optimized for speed in moderate conditions, made them extremely wet in heavy seas. At full power in a force 10 gale, both ships shipped water forward in quantities that threatened the forward turret machinery and put structural stress on their hull frames that their designers had not specified them to absorb indefinitely. Running at 31 knots into a North Sea gale was not simply a matter of advancing the throttles. It was a question of whether the hull could sustain the pounding without damage that would reduce speed later. Renown, built to an older standard that prioritized seakeeping alongside speed, drove through the same gale with less violent motion in her bow. Her heavier construction and deeper draft made her a more stable gun platform in conditions that were working against both sides. The speed advantage the Germans possessed was real. In the gale of April 9th, that advantage was narrowed to a margin neither Lutyens nor Whitworth could quantify precisely from their respective bridges. If you are enjoying this look at how the Royal Navy's most criticized capital ship turned the North Sea weather into a tactical equalizer, a quick subscribe helps the channel keep producing deep dives like this one. At 03:52 hours, Renown's lookouts sighted two large ships to the northeast. Whitworth increased to maximum speed and turned toward the contacts. At 03:57, Scharnhorst identified Renown and turned northeast at full power, Gneisenau following. The range at first sighting was approximately 18,000 yards. Renown opened fire with her forward 15-inch turrets at 04:05. Her first salvo fell short and to the right, the gale-driven spray making visual ranging difficult for both sides. Her second salvo straddled Gneisenau. Her third salvo, fired at a range of approximately 16,000 yards, struck Gneisenau with at least one 15-inch shell that penetrated her forward fire control director and put her main gunnery ranging system out of action. A second hit struck Gneisenau's forecastle and caused flooding that reduced her speed marginally and complicated her damage control party's ability to work forward of the breakwater in the sea conditions. Scharnhorst, turning to cover Gneisenau's retreat, fired several salvos at Renown that straddled her but achieved no penetrating hits, the German 11-inch shells either falling short or striking the water close enough alongside to send spray across the bridge without causing structural damage. Renown absorbed two hits from Scharnhorst that caused minor damage to her upper works and wounded several men, but did not penetrate her reconstructed armor belt or reduce her combat effectiveness. The Germans turned northwest and then north, running before the gale with their damaged fire control and their speed advantage no longer sufficient to open the range decisively. Whitworth pursued for 4 hours, pressing Renown to her maximum sustainable speed in the sea conditions, holding the range between 15 and 19,000 yards, occasionally firing when the spray and the swells allowed his gunnery director a clear enough sight picture to expect a useful result. Gneisenau's primary gunnery control was gone for the remainder of the engagement, her secondary directors working in degraded conditions that produced no further hits on Renown. Scharnhorst's after turret developed a mechanical failure during the pursuit phase that further reduced German firepower during the hours when the engagement might have been reversed. By 0800 hours, with the range opening as the Germans drew ahead in slightly easing conditions north of the main gale, Whitworth broke off the pursuit. Renown had expended 230 rounds of 6-inch ammunition and 19 15-inch shells. Gneisenau carried two 15-inch shell hits requiring dockyard repair that would keep her out of service for several weeks. The German heavy unit operation designed to cover the Norway invasion had been disrupted at its critical moment by a ship the critics had certified as too slow to catch anything worth shooting at. The strategic consequence of the engagement was immediate and measurable. Lutyens, with Gneisenau damaged and both ships having exposed their position to British forces, abandoned the diversionary mission and turned for the Norwegian coast and eventually for home. The capital ship cover that had been intended to hold Royal Navy attention away from the invasion convoys was withdrawn precisely when the landings at Narvik, Trondheim, Bergen, and the other Norwegian ports needed it most. British cruisers and destroyers, no longer facing the threat of Scharnhorst and Gneisenau in the open ocean, were free to operate against the invasion convoys with less caution, contributing to the destruction of 10 German destroyers at Narvik over the following days. The damage to Gneisenau's fire control meant that when the German ships returned to operations in the summer of 1940, they did so with one unit below full gunnery effectiveness, a degradation that shaped German planning for the heavy ship operations that followed throughout the year. Whitworth's pursuit report, filed from Renown on the afternoon of April 9th, was the first confirmed contact report on German capital ships in Norwegian waters and formed the intelligence foundation for the Royal Navy's subsequent operations against the invasion force. Renown continued in service through the entire war, one of the few capital ships to serve in every year of the conflict. She escorted Malta convoys in the Mediterranean, she screened the carrier strikes against turpits in the Norwegian fjords, and she carried Prime Minister Winston Churchill to the Atlantic Charter Conference with President Franklin Roosevelt in August 1941. The ship that critics had declared too slow for modern operations survived every engagement she entered, outlasted every German capital ship she had been compared unfavorably against, and was not broken up until 1948, 8 years after the gale off Norway had supposedly exposed all her limitations. What the action of April 9th proved was not that Renown was a match for Scharnhorst and Gneisenau in a calm water fleet engagement at design speeds. She was not. Her armor remained thinner than either German ship. Her 11-inch gun opponents carried a broadside weight that her 6-gun battery could not exceed. In the conditions the naval press imagined when they wrote about modern capital ship duels, a bright day with good visibility and calm seas that allowed design speeds to be achieved and sustained, the two German ships possessed genuine advantages over the older British battlecruiser. What April 9th proved was that the conditions the naval press imagined were not the conditions of the Norwegian Sea in early April, and that a ship built to drive through North Atlantic gales and keep shooting had advantages in those specific conditions that no speed trial had ever measured. The storm that the critics would have assumed favored the Germans by making pursuit impossible had instead stripped the speed advantage that made the Germans dangerous and left two modern capital ships being hit by 15-inch shells from a ship they were supposed to be able to outrun. Vice Admiral Whitworth had not chosen the weather. He had simply had a ship that was built for it.